Well, if you joined us last week's service was a little bit different than maybe what a normal structured Sunday service might look like. Last week we spent the entire time in worship songs. And then in between those sets of worship songs, we read through together one of the Psalms, Psalm 86. And what's powerful about the Psalms is they speak to us as more than just words. There's something about poetry and music that you can say the words, but when you sing them and when you hear them in that melody, man, they speak to us in a powerful way. They speak to our hearts. And so what we wanted to do is to have just a short series at the end of summer here, just working through a few of the Psalms. And as we think about summer, it's almost, school's already in session. August, this is the last weekend in August. Summer's kind of drawing to a close. And so as we go through these Psalms, it can almost feel like maybe that campfire, that end of summer campfire in the evening, and the night's growing long, and the embers are growing down, and the fire's dwindling down. And it's almost a little sad, right? As August is the last week in August, it's a little nostalgic maybe. But I have something that'll cheer you up this morning, okay? Something that'll cheer you up. We're going to be studying through Psalm 119. And this is the longest psalm in the Bible. And let me explain a little bit why that might cheer you up, because this is almost like my daughter Elizabeth, when it's time for night, time to go to bed, right? What does she do? She wants you to read a book or do something, and so what does she go and do? She grabs the longest, biggest book on the bookshelf, right? She's going to squeeze every minute out of that night, and so we're going to squeeze every minute out of this summer today as we look at the longest book, the longest psalm in the Bible. And in fact, you even get more for your money this morning, right? Because this is actually the longest chapter in the entire Bible as well. Psalm 19 is about the same length, the same word count, approximately as the entire book of Ephesians, right? Psalm 19 actually has more words. It's straight up longer than the book of Galatians, the book of James, the book of 1 Peter, the book of Colossians, right? And there's a special reason why this psalm is so long and so huge, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. I said I wanted to squeeze out the last minutes of summer, but I'll come clean. There's actually another reason why I chose this particular psalm for this morning. And it wasn't just because it was a long psalm. I picked this psalm because there's a very special story that goes with this particular psalm. This psalm and this story took place what seems like forever ago, but it was in my very first class of seminary. My very first class, and it was my first class that I had taken, and we were studying through the Old Testament together. Where else do you start, right? My very first class of seminary, my very first year of seminary, and in that study, the professor came in and introduced herself, and she was a prestigious professor of the Old Testament. And I remember she spent a couple minutes just kind of explaining her background. She specialized in the book of Deuteronomy. She, in fact, spent over 20 years studying and carefully researching the book of Deuteronomy. So she was essentially an expert in the Old Testament Jewish laws and customs. And as she was explaining her credentials to the class, her background, I think everybody in the class had the same kind of question in the back of their minds, right? Why in the world would anyone spend 20 plus years studying Deuteronomy, right? If you're familiar with that book at all, there's nothing quite like 4,000-year-old Jewish law and legal codes, right? Some of us maybe even wondered in the back of our mind, did she have a problem falling asleep at night? Or how did this start? How did you get a passion in Deuteronomy? And don't get me wrong, Deuteronomy is part of the Bible. There's some serious beauty in there, but I think we all had the same question in the back of our minds, right? Why would you study Deuteronomy for 20 plus years? Why not something like the Gospel of Matthew instead, right? Anyways, This is sort of the moment after she explained her background where it got really awkward in the classroom because one brave soul, maybe brave, maybe a little foolish, raised their hand and actually asked her, right? Actually, and the question kind of went like this. Why in the world would you spend 20 years studying Deuteronomy, right? Why would you ever do that? And it got that awkward silence at that moment. And, there's some questions that you keep in your mind, right? The type of questions that we don't actually say out loud, and that almost seemed like one of them, right? Kind of gave him a little nudge, like, dude, that's her life's work, studying Deuteronomy. Be nice, right? And I'll never forget what happened next. She calmly told the class to pull out their Bibles and turn to Psalm 119. And she just started reading the psalm aloud. And we sat there in that psalm, just looking at those words and just pondering them until basically every single person in that classroom was convinced there was something we had all missed about the Old Testament. There was something there, even in books like Deuteronomy, that would be worth spending 20 plus years studying. That day in that class, I know my personal opinions of the Old Testament changed. I discovered something in there that makes me excited to read and share about it even today. And so the real reason we're looking at Psalm 119 is because I wanted to share with you what I learned in that classroom so many years ago. Now, although we won't be able to read every line of Psalm 119, we will focus this morning, and we're going to be focusing in basically and studying this psalm because we're going to try to find out what these words reveal about the Old Testament. The Old Testament as a whole. So let's start by just starting how that class started. Open your Bibles. Let's just start reading through a little bit of Psalm 19 just to get a flavor of it. We'll read the first 24 verses. And I'll read them aloud for you. Psalm 119, picking up in verse 1. Blessed are those whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord. Blessed are those who keep his statutes and seek him with all their heart. They do no wrong, but follow his ways. You have laid down precepts that are to be fully obeyed. Oh, that my ways were steadfast in obeying your decrees. Then I would not be put to shame when I consider all your commands. I will praise you with an upright heart as I learn your righteous laws. I will obey your decrees. Do not utterly forsake me. How can a young man stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. I seek you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commands. I've hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Praise be to you, Lord. Teach me your ways. With my lips I recount all the laws that come from your mouth. I rejoice in following your statutes as one rejoices in great riches. I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. Be good to your servant while I live, that I may obey your word. Open my eyes that I may see wonderful things in your law. I'm a stranger on earth. Do not hide your commands from me. My soul is consumed with longing for your laws at all times. You rebuke the arrogant who are accursed, those who stray from your commands. Remove from me their scorn and contempt, for I keep your statutes. The rulers sit together and slander me. Your servant will meditate on your decrees. Your statutes are my delight. They are my counselors. Now we got a little bit of a taste of this psalm. And as we look at this powerful psalm, we're going to start and just look at some of the more surface level observations. As we're trying to understand what this psalm is saying, we're going to start with those surface level observations, and then we're going to go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of Psalm 119. So let's just start with some surface level observations, because even on the surface, there are some peculiarities about Psalm 119. Now, the basic observation we could make about this psalm is actually a little bit confusing. The thing about this psalm that almost makes it really unique, we don't always notice right at first. So let me give you some visual aid that will help assist you in understanding what's happening on Psalm 119. And I want you to imagine, it's not like this in what we just read, but I want you to imagine that the first letter of every single verse for the first 8 verses all started with the exact same letter, the letter A. Right? So I've got it up here on the screen. The first 8 verses, they all start with the letter A. So another, apart, another A word, right? They all start with these A words, every sentence. And now I want you to imagine that you kept reading as we did. And as you get to the second set of 8 verses, you notice that all of those verses, the words start with the letter B. So there it is. So first 8 verses start with A, second 8 verses start with B. And we're starting to see a pattern, right? Oh, okay, there's something happening here. And then as we kept reading, we read through 24 verses this morning. I want you to imagine the next 8 verses, they all start with the letter G. See, we thought maybe C. They start with the letter G, right? What just happened? Well, maybe you're a little bit confused. Why the letter G? Why not C? Well, of course, right? This psalm was written in Hebrew. And Hebrew has 22 letters in its alphabet. We have 26. And so the Hebrew alphabet goes A, B, G, D, E, right? So that's the way, like there's no C in there. It goes G, right? It's the same way with Greek. Alpha, beta, gamma. It goes to G next in its alphabet. So we already have the ABGs of Hebrew. And I know that's a little bit confusing to see it go to G, but there are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. There's 8 lines per letter, just like that, all the way through the alphabet, letter after letter after letter. And so 8 times 22 letters, that's 176 verses. And that happens to be exactly how many verses are in Psalm 119. And so some of us might be a little bit curious. That makes sense why this psalm is so long, but why 8 lines, 8 stanzas per letter of the alphabet? Why not 7, right? That would have been easier for the author, and 7's kind of a special number in the Bible. Why 8? Well, there is some speculation about this. It's not a firm answer. There's speculation that scholars make about this, but there is a very interesting observation that always comes up at this moment. Why is there 8 lines per letter? And the observation is that there are 8 key words in this psalm. There are 8 specific words in this psalm that are repeated a ton of times. And they're repeated approximately the same amount of times amongst them, right? There's about 22 times that these specific words are repeated throughout this psalm. They're the key words, and there's 8 of them. And I'll throw them up on the screen for you if you're ever wondering, right? So here they are. For those online, I'll just read them out to you so you can hear them. One of the key words is law. Occurs 25 times. Word, 20 times. Sayings is 19 times. We often translate that promises, but sayings, 19 times. Commandment, 22 times. Statutes, 21 times. Judgment, 23 times. Precepts, 21 times. Testimony, 22 times. So what ends up happening is you're reading through these Psalms is you start to realize in almost every verse, in almost every single verse, one of those words appears. Through the whole psalm. There's some lines that have 2 of them, right? So some don't. But on average, one of those words appears in every single line. And there's 8 words, and they're all basically synonyms. They're all talking about the exact same thing, right? All of those words right there are basically talking about God's law and the writings of the Old Testament. So each of those 8 words is essentially talking about books like Deuteronomy. Fascinating. 8 key words, 8 lines per alphabet letter, 22 alphabet letters, 176 lines. Okay. So let's take a short little pause at this moment, right? We just took in a lot. We're kind of sitting on a scenic overlook here. This is the scenic vista. Let me just pause and recognize this with me, okay? Basically, an absolute genius wrote Psalm 119 to do all this. Think about the time it would take. An absolute genius wrote Psalm 119. This psalm was written by the likes of a Beethoven or a Mozart. Psalm 119 is incredibly sophisticated, poetical, devotional song, right? That happens to be as long as the entire books of the Bible. Wow. Take it in. Scenic overlook. But the question starts to emerge. What exactly is the melody of this Beethoven-like song that's being played for us? See, all the observations we've made so far are surface level. I've told you what this psalm is comprised of, what it looks like, but why? Why did that professor, my first year of seminary, open to this particular psalm and start reading these particular words until everyone in the class was convinced we had overlooked something incredibly important and powerful about the Old Testament? Well, it's time to go a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole, right? We're going to go a little bit deeper than just those surface level observations. It's time to see what this psalm is trying to communicate to us. What is the melody that this Beethoven-like author is playing for us? Now, as we think about this psalm, and we think about all the different lines and words, let's just, for a moment, let's focus in on those 8 keywords, that we just saw a couple minutes ago. And what is it that the author is trying to communicate to us about those 8 keywords? Well, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to summarize a few of the different verses for you, okay? I'm just going to pick out and work kind of from the top to the bottom and just read some of the verses to you that are talking about these 8 words and listen to what the author is trying to tell us. So verses 14 and 15 said, I rejoice in following your statutes, as one rejoices in great riches. I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. Verse 18 said, open my eyes that I may see the wonderful things in your law. Verse 24 said, your statutes are my delight. They are my counselors. 29 says, cause me to understand the ways of your precepts, that I may meditate on your wonderful deeds. 28 says, my soul is weary with sorrow. My soul is weary with sorrow. Strengthen me according to your word. 32 says, I run in the path of your commands, for you have broadened my understanding. 47 through 48 say these words, for I delight in your commands because I love them. I reach out for your commands, which I love, that I may meditate on your decrees. 52 says, I remember, Lord, your ancient laws, and I find comfort in them. 62 is kind of interesting. It says, at midnight, I rise to give you thanks for your righteous laws. This guy gets up in the middle of the night, sets his alarm for midnight to rise just to thank God for the laws. Wow, okay. Psalm 119 verse 72 says, the law from your mouth is more precious to me than thousands of pieces of silver or gold. Well, just pause for a minute, right? Like, commonly in this time period, 10 pieces of gold was like a year's worth of wages. So this is more precious than thousands of pieces of gold and silver. Man, 1,000 pieces of gold, that's like today's standard, like over $1.8 million. The law from your mouth is more precious to me than over $1.8 million. Okay, just two more. There's tons to choose from. Here's 2 more. Verse 96 says, "To all perfection I see a limit, but your commands are boundless." Here's the last one. Verse 103, "How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth." I've got a question for you, okay? Are the words of the Old Testament books, like say Deuteronomy, are they sweeter than honey in your mouth? Maybe there's part of us that's a little confused, right? Even reading through this. Like, does this Beethoven-like author, this dude who wrote Psalm 119, does he have a different book of Deuteronomy than me, right? Deuteronomy is the 10 Commandments and all the Jewish laws and customs. Well, let me clarify. This Beethoven-like author of Psalm 119 is reading, in fact, the same words of Deuteronomy that we are. Could it be instead that we've missed something? Is there something our Beethoven guy is seeing that we're not seeing? Because, see, I know for me, right, especially walking in that classroom years ago, books like Deuteronomy, the laws of God, right, the words that always came to my mind when I was thinking of books like that were maybe burden. And this author, the author of Psalm 119, he uses different words. He says, "Your commands," verse 32, "your commands have set me free, have set my heart free." I would think words, thinking of Deuteronomy, of maybe words like obligation, right? But this author says words like comfort, strength, hope. I hate to admit it, but I even thought words like boring. But this author says words like wonder, delight, joy, riches. And I realized one of the key points that caused me personally to stumble as I was trying to look at the Old Testament and figure out what happened. What did I miss here? What is he seeing that I'm not seeing? It happened because I actually misunderstood in part the nature of the New Testament. See, the second half of the Bible, the New Testament, it talks a lot about Jesus. And Jesus says things like in Matthew 5, 17 through 18, the Sermon on the Mount, right? Jesus says things like, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." And with just a few minutes of kind of thinking through even those passages like Matthew 5, 17 through 18, what we just read, we can realize that, man, you know what? We no longer perform temple sacrifices, right? The temple in Jerusalem is long gone. But Jesus said nothing in the law would disappear until everything is accomplished. In fact, in verse 17, Jesus helps clarify and explain what we just read, right? He said that he has come to fulfill the law and prophets, to fulfill the Old Testament. And here's where the misunderstanding for me took place. See, when I think of Jesus has fulfilled and accomplished the Old Testament law and prophets, the first half of this book, I think for me, the misunderstanding I had was I thought, oh, I guess we don't really need that half anymore, do we? But here is what I was misunderstanding. Yes, the Old Testament law and prophets have been fulfilled, but what was their purpose? What was their purpose? The law was designed to do something, to accomplish something. It has a purpose. Jesus is talking about it. The Apostle Paul, who spent a large portion of his life as a Jewish Pharisee, an expert in the Old Testament laws, the Apostle Paul describes the purpose of the Old Testament for us in the New Testament letters like Galatians. And in particular in Galatians chapter 3, Paul describes the purpose of the Old Testament. And he uses some peculiar words. He uses words like guardian, trustee, supervisor. It's almost like, okay, here's the visual picture that Paul's using, this visual metaphor of what Paul's using. I have a babysitter for Elizabeth, right? We've hired a babysitter to guard and protect our kids, to take care of them until we come home. Okay. But whose kids, exactly, were the Old Testament laws put in charge to guard and protect, to prepare? In Galatians chapter 3, verses 23 through 25, Paul says it this way. But before faith came, we were kept in custody under the law, being confined for the faith that was destined to be revealed. Therefore, the law has become our guardian to lead us to Christ, so that we may be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. See, the Old Testament laws were like a temporary steward of the kingdom, designed to be like a guardian who trains up the king's children, to prepare them and anticipate them for their parents' return. When Jesus steps on the scene and says things like, I have come to fulfill the Old Testament, I have come to pick up my kids, and nothing in the Old Testament will disappear. The babysitter will not disappear. The babysitter will not leave and exit the door and leave the driveway, drive home, right? Until everything has been accomplished. And I claim my children. Our Beethoven-like author of Psalm 119, he sees it. He sees it. He sees how the law and prophets, books like Deuteronomy, he sees that the law has become our guardian to lead us to Christ, so that we may be justified by faith. In fact, let me just quote you exactly Psalm 119's words to help communicate it to you. What is he seeing? Here's Psalm 119, verses 81 through 84. My soul faints with longing for your salvation, but I have put my hope in your word. My eyes fail looking for your promise. I say, when will you comfort me? Though I am a wineskin in the smoke, I do not forget your decrees. How long must your servant wait? If you're reading through Psalm 119 this week at home, you'll notice that there's at times almost a battle going on in Psalm 119. The author keeps noting how everything keeps, and all these different people groups, they keep breaking God's laws. He calls them the arrogant or the wicked or the lawbreakers, the rebellious ones. And the author has this internal battle going on in between the verses of Psalm 119. The author sees the rebellious lawbreakers in the world around him, and he craves for justice. He sees the beauty, the hope. He craves for things to be made right. But the author has this internal battle going on, because the author of this psalm, our Beethoven, he realizes that he himself has broken God's laws. And although in his heart, he loves God, in the end, his actions have proved to be no better than even the wicked. Friends, that's literally how Psalm 119 ends. The climactic ending of this psalm. Are you ready to hear it? Psalm 119, I'll pick up in verse 174 and we'll go to the end. Verse 174 says, I long for your salvation, Lord, and your law gives me delight. Let me live that I may praise you, and may your laws sustain me. I have strayed like a sheep, like a lost sheep. Seek your servant. for I have not forgotten your commands. I have strayed like a lost sheep. Seek your servant, for I have not forgotten your commands. After carefully studying and meditating on God's laws, right? This is our Beethoven author guy. He's been studying through the Old Testament. He's obviously spent quite a bit of time, right? This is a masterpiece. And our Beethoven author, at the end of his glorious masterpiece, he's been led right to the feet of Jesus. The law was his guardian that led him to Christ. And so as the New Testament Gospels are largely signposts pointing us back to say, look at this event, look at this guy Jesus. They're pointing us backwards to his life and ministry. The Old Testament laws were designed to be signposts pointing forwards to Jesus. It's why that professor spent 20 plus years studying the laws of Deuteronomy, right? Because she saw how even in those laws, they led her right to the feet of Jesus. As this message starts to draw to a close, I would just challenge you this week just to maybe read through this super long psalm. Take a attempt at it. Start reading through it. Let the beauty and hope that this author sees, let this psalm be a guidepost that leads you to Christ as well. And there's one particular portion of this psalm. I know it's long. There's one particular portion of this psalm that's actually my favorite. It's verses 33 through 40. And I would just encourage you this week, at some point during this week, maybe it's every morning, maybe it's every day, let those particular verses be a prayer that you personally make. These verses 33 through 40, man, these are powerful verses because these are almost those verses where you start to see it turning in the mind of this Beethoven, right? He starts to realize that God's going to have to be the one that carries the weight when it comes to the Old Testament laws. In fact, every single one of those verses from 33 to 40, they all start with a petition to God. He realizes where his hope and his salvation comes from. The words of the Old Testament lead him right to the feet of Jesus. And as we close together, I'm actually going to close by praying these exact same words, verses 33 through 40, over us today. Let the words of this psalm lead us to Christ. Let them accomplish their purpose and have that change and transformation in our heart we pray for. Would you bow your heads with me? Teach us, Lord, the way of your decrees, that we may follow it to the end. Give us understanding so that we may keep your law and obey it with all our heart. Direct us in the path of your commands, for there we find delight. Turn our hearts toward your statutes and not toward selfish gain. Turn our eyes away from worthless things. Preserve our lives according to your word. Fulfill your promise to your servants so that you may be feared. Take away the disgrace we dread, for your laws are good. How we long for your precepts. In your righteousness, preserve our lives, we pray. Amen.